So the Kahoot that we just did looked at which numbers were bigger and which numbers were smaller. And how do we compare numbers when some are decimals, some are fractions, some are mixed numbers. So one of the things that we're going to do, first of all, we should put the date up on our notes again. It's October 2nd. What's that? We haven't done this yet. So you take out a blank piece of paper. No, you take out a blank piece of paper and you can write this down. All of it down, yep. So the first thing that we can do to help us order numbers is to change our fractions to decimals. Now, if you're changing a fraction to a decimal on your calculator, right, if I wanted to change the second one, 3/4, to a decimal, I could go to my calculator. I could go 3 divided by 4, push enter, and it changes it from a fraction to a decimal. Now, some of these you should be able to do in your head. Do you know that a half is 0.5? Okay. 3/4, 1/4. 4 out of 8, can you see that that's the same as a half? And then we'd have a negative a half. So I'll give you some time to write that down and then make the number line from -1 to 1 going by tenths. So now what we can do is we can start to label where these things are. Okay? On our number line, all of our values there are in decimals. So the first number we have is a half. We can put that right there at 0.5. If you were to compare 1/2 and 3/4, you now know that 3/4 is bigger. 3/4 is 0.75. Notice on our number line, I don't have 0.75. Where would I place 0.75 on this number line? I'll do it in green because it's in green over there. Right between 0.7 and 0.8. Here would be 0.75. And since that was 3/4 originally, I'll label that as 3/4. We can now say that 3/4 is bigger than 1/2. And so if we wanted to write that with an inequality to say which one is bigger, we would say 3/4 is bigger than 1/2, or 1/2 is less than 3/4. So again, you can think the Pac-Man eats the bigger one, right? But I like to be able to read it, because if someone says, what does this mean? This means that 1/2 is less than 3/4. It means 3/4 is bigger than 1/2. It doesn't mean Pac-Man 3/4. I mean, you can say that, but you have to be able to explain what it means. So one of the things that I do when reading it is you can read inequalities this way. So I say 1/2. When I see this symbol, since a small side is first with 1 point and the two side is second with 2 points, I see the small side first, I'd say 1/2 is less than 3/4. You can also read this backwards. 3/4 is bigger than 1/2, because you would hit the 2 points first, which is bigger than 1 point. I find that that's how it helps me be able to read it better. Next up, we've got 0.25, which is 1/4. 0.25 would be right here. So here we would label 1/4. Next one, -0.5. -0.5 right here. So we've got -4/8, and -2/4 is also right there. Those two numbers are identical. So sometimes we have numbers that look different, but actually are the same number. -4/8 and -2/4 are the same. The next one, -0.2. That was already a decimal. That's easy to put on here because it was already a decimal, negative 0.2. 6/8 is 0.75, which we already labeled. So now we know that 6/8 and 3/4 are the same. Now you might have thought, oh, yes, because 6/8 isn't in lowest terms. I could have reduced it to 3/4, and that's another way that you could see that they're the same number. 4 out of 4. That's equal to 1. Can label that right there. 4 divided by 4 is 1. That makes sense that that would go there. Negative 8.75. Now, negative 0.875, that's more than negative 0.8, less than negative 0.9. If I were to label this on here, I need to figure out where between negative 0.8 and negative 0.9 I'm going to put it. Does it make sense that I put it closer to negative 0.9? Because this is 7 over negative 8, which is negative 0.875. And the last one we have is 0.3 repeated. Where does that fit on our number line? Well, it would be 0.333333 forever. So it's going to be somewhere between 0.3 and 0.4, closer to 0.3. There's 1/3. If we can write our numbers and order them on our number line, well, then we can start to see which numbers are bigger than others. And this is a favorite question that gets, this is one that students will often get wrong. Which is bigger? 1/3 is bigger. We see it on our number line. So we would say 1/3 is bigger than 1/4. 1/4 is less than 1/3. Can you see why students would say that 1/4 is bigger than 1/3? You see the 4, you see the 3, right? You know that 4 is bigger than 3. Okay? So you would be tempted to say that 1/4 is bigger than 1/3. Let's say something delicious. Let's think of something delicious. Have you seen those ice cream cakes that are in like a log shape from Dairy Queen? They're delicious. I think so. So if you had one of those, I'll draw it out here. They look like this, right? Round on this side and then they're like this. That's what they look like. When they've got, sorry, I have to add some detail here. There's like chocolate ice cream, right? Chocolate ice cream in there, and then they've got that fudge. Better just get, there we go. Okay. And they got the fudge around it. Oh, now I'm getting hungry right now. Okay? So the question is, you have a choice. When we're thinking about 1/4 or 1/3, we could either split this thing into 3 pieces, and you get one of those 3 pieces, or it could be split into 4 pieces, and you get one of those 4 pieces. Can you see from that idea that 1/3 is definitely bigger than 1/4? If they cut it into only 3 pieces, the pieces are going to be bigger. 1/3 would be bigger than 1/4. The more of these that you can change from a fraction to a decimal in your head, the better. So another one that I find that's easy to do is if you think about money, right? 1/2. 1/2 is easy, is 0.5. This is a quarter. How much is a quarter worth? 25 cents. 1/4 is 25 cents. It is 0.25 of 1. And then if you have 3/4, how much money do you have? 75 cents. So these are some that you can do fairly easily in your head. And I'll give you some techniques later to be able to do some more in your head. But right now we're going to do some ordering practice. Okay, so we are going to do a little bit of review of decimals and place value. And then I was going around and there was some things that I was going to look at your scale and help you with some things on there as well. So remember, we have our tenths, we have our hundredths, we have our thousandths. We'll quickly go through this because this is stuff you've done before, right? 1/10 is 0.1 or 1/10, 1/100th. Then that number would be in the hundredths category, and that's 1 over 100. And I don't think you need to write this down because we've done this already, right? So last one, 1,000.001 and 1,000th. Now, one of the things I noticed on the paper that you were working on is that if you had a number line between 0 and 1, and on the paper that you have 2, 3, it's split into 5 sections. One of the things that we have to be able to do is label what those sections are. Most people know that halfway, right, halfway is 0.5. But what happens if it's divided into 5 sections? How much is each section? Okay? Some people can figure it out just by looking, and they say, oh, if you're going from 0 to 1 and you're in 5 sections, it's 0.2, 0.4, 0.6, and 0.8. Some people can just look at that and say, I know that that's how it is. But if you're having trouble with that, you can use your calculator and say, well, I have the number 1, and it's being divided into 5 sections. So I take 1, I divide it by 5, and it will tell you what one of your sections is. One of your sections is 0.2. And that tells me, okay, my first section 0.2. If I add another 0.2, my second section would be 0.4. My third section would be 0.6. My fourth section would be 0.8. Because I can just keep adding, right? 0.2 plus 0.2, that'll be my second section. Plus 0.2, that'll be my third section. Plus 0.2, that'll be my fourth section. So sometimes, and on the sheet that you had, your number line was divided into 5. It's helpful to label each of those little sections so that if you had to say, where would I put 0.35? Well, 0.3 is between 0.2 and 0.4. 0.35 then would be right there. What would you have if I had my number line from 0 to 1 and I decided to do 10 sections? What would one of the sections be? It would be 0.1, right, which is 1/10. If you went from 0 to 1, and they just divided it into 2 sections, that one would be 0.5. What happens if it was 0 to 1, and we divided it into 3 sections? Right? Again, we could go to our calculator if we can't figure this out and say, oh, I've got 1, I'm divided it into 3 sections, 0.333 repeated. So this one would be 0.3 repeated, and this one would be 0.6 repeated. Those would be decimals. Sometimes, because those decimals aren't really nice, sometimes people just mark it with that's 1/3, and that's 2/3, because we divided it into 3. We've seen by numbering things on our number line that sometimes the same number appears in 2 different ways. We call these equivalent numbers because they're equal to each other. And here's an example. What would happen if I simplified each of these? What's negative 10 divided by 2? Negative 5. What negative square root of 25? Square root of 25 is 5, and a negative in front, that would still be negative 5. And 25 divided by negative 5? Positive divided by negative is negative. 25 divided by 5, still negative 5. So even though all three of those look different, they are all equal to the same thing. So, again, a little bit of review. Here's 3 for you to do on your paper. Quickly write down the answers. Convert those to a fraction. And after you've converted to a fraction, see if it's in lowest terms. You can use your calculator to help. Oh, I check how you did. First of all, the first step on each of these, this is in your hundredths. So you get 53 over 100. This one is in your tenths. So you get 6 over 10, but since it's negative 6 over 10. And this one's in your thousandths. So 912 over 1,000, and it's negative, so that negative stays out there. That's the perfect first step for all of these. Now we're going to have to check, do these divide by the same number so we can reduce them? Let's start with the middle one, looks the easiest. Is there a number you can divide both 6 and 10 by? 2. So if I divide them both by 2, this is equal to still negative, but now negative 3/5. And that's in lowest terms. The other two are a little bit more difficult. Okay? 53 over 100, they don't both divide by 2. 53, is 53 on your times table? No. So 53 isn't a number that divides nicely by anything. And so this one is already done. Now some calculators, check this out. Okay? Some calculators, when you get a decimal, so when I do 6 divided by 10, tells me 0.6. Some calculators allow you to change a decimal back to a fraction. On my calculator here, I can change it by going math and says, number 1, change it to a fraction. Says, would you like to change your answer to a fraction? And when I push yes, see if it comes up as 6/10. Comes up as 3/5. It automatically reduces it to its lowest term. So when I do 53 out of 100, 0.53, if I change it to a fraction, it keeps it as 53 out of 100. I know from my calculator that this one is in lowest terms. But if I go to 912, 912 divided by 1,000, can you see both of those could be divided by 2? Okay? But when I do it on my calculator math fraction, it tells me, oh, you could get it to 114 over 125. So I'm going to write 114 over 125. If you could divide them both by 2, again, you could use your calculator for this. 1,000 divided by 2 is 500. 912 divided by 2 is 456. And then, they're both even numbers, means I could divide them by 2 again. If I did that again, my calculator, this becomes 250. 456 divided by 2 is 228. Can divide them by 2 again. See how long this is taking without 114 divided by 125. And now we'd have to think, well, they can't divide by 2 anymore. You could check, do they both divide by 3? They don't. Do they both divide by 5? They don't. This is done. But it's sure nice on the calculator that it does that for me. So one thing, when you get your own calculator, it's good to be able to see, does my calculator do things like this? Right? If you're borrowing a calculator all the time, you might get a different one every time. You won't know some of the tricks of the calculator, so it's important that you get your own calculator and see what it can do. If you have your own calculator and you want to ask, does my calculator do that? I can see if I can figure that out for you. Converting repeating decimals to fractions. Now, I showed you this once already, but we never had it in our notes, so we'll add it to our notes right now. But I want to see if anybody remembers how to do these ones. Do you remember what 0.4 repeated as a fraction was? 4 out of 9. Excellent. Does anyone remember what 0.27 repeated was? 27 over 99. And you're starting probably to look and see a pattern. Logan, do you see a pattern happening? Yeah. 0.367 repeated? It'll be negative 367 over 999. They all have nines. Depends if you go to your thousandths, then you go to 999. If you go to your hundredths, you'd go to 99. So they're all over nines. So if you wanted to change something from a 99 or a 9 or a 999 back to a decimal, this would be 0.19, and it would repeat forever. Now, some of you earlier said, oh, I know what 1/3 is. 1/3 is 0.3 repeated, right? Watch this. If anything over 9 is that number repeated, can you see how 1/3 can become 3/9? And then you can make it 0.3 repeated. Okay? So now a little bit of problem solving. Some of these are pretty easy, and then I'm going to add them a little bit more difficult. 0.24 repeated will be 24 out of 99. No problems there. 0.7 repeated, 7 out of 9. And negative. All right. So far, pretty straightforward. Not too bad. These ones, also not too bad. 5/9. 0.5 repeated. 52/99. All right, so pretty straightforward, pretty easy. A little bit of problem solving. 4/11 and 13/33 without a calculator. We have to write these as, okay? Now we have to do this without a calculator. We have to come up with the answer without a calculator. If you get stuck, you could try it on your calculator, 4 divided by 11, see what you get, and see if that gives you a hint for what you maybe should do. Did anybody type it into their calculator to get an answer? What did you get? Do 4 divided by 11. See what you get on your calculator. Luke, what did you get? 4 divided by 11. 0.36 repeated. So now the question is, how could I have done that without my calculator? If I asked you to do 0.36 repeated to a fraction, what would you tell me? 36 out of 99. How does 4 out of 11, how can I get that to help me get 0.36 now that I know that it's equal to 36 out of 9? I can take 4 out of 11 times this by 9 times this by 9. $99 on the bottom, 36 on the top. Ooh, 0.36 repeated. So then what does 13 out of 33? We'll just finish this one and then you can go. Do you see something you could do with this one? Not yet. Can you make this one out of 99? What would you have to do? Times by 3. 13 times 3 is 39. Now as a decimal, get 0.39 repeated. That's pretty cool. All right, so that's where we're going to end for today.